Sometimes, the most ordinary faces hide the most extraordinary secrets. She thought he was just another taxi driver, until one night changed everything. The rain was falling in sheets that night, tapping relentlessly against the glass windows of the city. The streets glowed with the reflections of neon lights, blurring colors into rivers of red and blue. Amidst this chaos, she hailed a taxi jest. Another ride home after a long and exhausting day. The car pulled up silently. Its headlights cut through the mist, and when the door opened, she saw him. The driver. He wore an old, worn-out jacket, his cap tilted low, hiding much of his face. His hands gripped the steering wheel with calm precision, and when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, almost too controlled for someone who was supposed to be just a taxi driver. At first, she didn't notice anything unusual. She gave him her address, leaned back in the seat, and let her mind wander. But as the car moved through the city, she realized something strange. The driver didn't ask for directions. He didn't check a GPS. Instead, he took turns through narrow lanes and hidden shortcuts she had never seen before. Roads so quiet, it felt as if they didn't even exist on the city map. Her curiosity grew. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes studying the rearview mirror. His gaze was sharp, focused not like a man trying to earn a living, but like someone on a mission. His posture was upright, disciplined, almost military. It was a fleeting thought, but the question struck her. Who really was this man? What started as a simple ride home was about to become the beginning of a secret she never expected to uncover. The rain outside grew heavier, turning the streets into silver rivers. Inside the taxi, the silence was sharp, broken only by the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. She sat quietly, but her mind was anything but calm. Every time she looked up, she caught his eyes in the mirror eyes that seemed to carry a weight, as though they had seen more than they should. At one red light, the car stopped. She glanced out of the window, noticing two men standing in the shadows of an alley. They seemed rough, dangerous, and one of them pointed discreetly toward the taxi. Her heart skipped. Before she could even react, the driver adjusted his rearview mirror, saw them too, and without hesitation, pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward, leaving the alley end. Those men behind in an instant. She froze. How did he know? Most drivers would have ignored it, but not him. His reaction was too quick, too precise, as if he had trained for moments like these. Do you know them? She asked hesitantly, her voice almost drowned by the rain. For the first time, he spoke more than a word. His voice was calm but firm. No, but it's better to avoid eyes that watch too closely. The way he said it sent shivers down her spine. She studied him quietly now, noticing the sharpness in his movements, the way he scanned every street, every corner, as though danger could appear at any second. As the ride continued, the city lights faded. The taxi entered quieter streets, the kind where silence felt heavy. Her phone buzzed with a message, but she ignored it. Her focus locked on the man driving her. She wanted to ask more about his life, about why he seemed so different, but something told her he wasn't the kind of man who answered questions easily. Then, out of nowhere, the car slowed down. Ahead, a black SUV blocked the road. Its windows were tinted, its presence threatening. For a moment, time seemed to stop. She turned to the driver, expecting panic, maybe fear, but instead, his expression remained unreadable. Calm, focused, without saying a word. He shifted the gear, reversed sharply into a side street, and disappeared into the maze of back roads before the SUV even had a chance to move. Her pulse was racing. This wasn't normal. No ordinary driver could have done that with such precision. She finally whispered, almost to herself, "Who are you?" His eyes flicked to the mirror, locking with hers for a fraction of a second. And though he said nothing, the silence was louder than any answer. She thought he was just a driver, but the city was about to reveal the truth he had tried so hard to bury. The ride continued in silence, but the silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy, like a storm waiting to break. She sat in the back seat, staring at the blurred city lights racing past, her thoughts tangled. Every instinct told her this man was not who he appeared to be. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky but firm. You knew how to escape them. That wasn't luck. That was training. He didn't respond immediately. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, the faint scars on his knuckles catching the dim glow of the dashboard light. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Some roads teach you how to survive. Some people don't get the luxury of driving in peace." His words weren't an answer, but they weren't a denial either. She leaned back, unsettled. Her curiosity, however, only grew stronger. The taxi eventually stopped outside her apartment. Rain trickled down the windows, casting fleeting patterns of light and shadow across the interior. She hesitated before opening the door. Something inside her screamed that this man was more than a driver, someone carrying a story darker than the night itself. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping out into the wet street. But as she turned, something caught her Aja black sedan parked across the road. Its engine was off, but its presence felt wrong. Two silhouettes sat inside, motionless, watching. Her breath quickened. She glanced back at the driver he had already noticed. Without a word, he pulled out a small piece of folded paper from his jacket pocket and slipped it into her hand. "Stay inside tonight," he murmured, "and don't trust the shadows." Before she could ask anything, he drove off, the red taillights fading into the misty rain. She stood frozen, drenched under the streetlight, staring at the paper. Slowly, she unfolded it. A single line was written, sharp and deliberate. "They are not after you. They are after me." Her heart skipped. Who was he? Why would anyone be after a taxi driver? That night, sleep became impossible. The city's noises felt louder. Every creak of the floorboards felt suspicious. She kept replaying his words, his actions, his eyes. There was something dangerous about him, but also something protective. Something that made her feel safer in his presence than alone in her locked apartment. By morning, curiosity defeated fear. She had to know the truth. Instead of going to work, she waited outside the same street where she had hailed his taxi the night before. Hours passed, and just when she thought he might never appear, again there he was. Same car, same calm face, same heavy silence that seemed to hide storms. She stepped forward, determined. This time, she wouldn't just sit quietly in the back seat. This time, she would demand answers. She thought she was following a taxi driver, but what she was about to uncover could shatter everything she believed. The morning sun had barely touched the city's skyline when she saw him again. The same battered taxi stopped at the corner as though fate itself had placed him in her path. He didn't look surprised when she approached, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly, like he had been expecting her. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, unlocking the door. "And you shouldn't be lying," she replied sharply, sliding into the back seat. For the first time, he gave a faint, almost bitter smile. Everyone lies. The question is, who are you willing to believe? The taxi merged into the morning traffic, but the world outside felt muted. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken truths. She leaned forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "Those men last night! The black car? Why are they following you? Who are you really?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into the glove compartment and pulled out an old, worn-out envelope. The edges were frayed, the seal broken long ago. He handed it to her without looking back. "Read it," he said flatly. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance shots. To her shock, they weren't of him, but of people in powerful positions. Politicians, businessmen, even a foreign diplomat, and scribbled across one of the photos was a single word in bold red ink. Eliminate or stomach twisted, she looked at him, horrified. "You were an assassin." His hands tightened on the wheel. For a moment, she thought he might slam the brakes. His silence was louder than any confession. Finally, he spoke in a voice that carried both weight and regret. "Once, a long time ago, before I chose this life, before I thought I could disappear." She stared at him, her pulse racing. Everything about him suddenly made sense the way he fought. The scars, the eyes that had seen too much. He wasn't just a driver. He was a man who had tried to bury his past beneath the noise of the city's streets. But why are they after you now? She whispered. Because no one leaves that world clean, he replied, his tone cold, almost resigned. I walked away. And now, they want to erase me. The car turned sharply into a quieter street. She clutched the photos in her lap, her mind spinning. You saved me last night. You didn't have to. What? He finally glanced at her through the rearview mirror. His eyes softened, just for a moment. Because you reminded me of someone I couldn't save. Her breath caught. There was pain in his voice. Pain that stretched back years, carved deep into his soul. And before she could ask who that someone was, the unmistakable roar of engines filled the street. She looked back. 2 black SUVs closing in fast. His voice dropped into a chilling calm. Hold on. This ride's about to get dangerous. When the hunter becomes the hunted, the streets of the city turn into a battlefield. The sound of engines thundered behind them, echoing through the narrow street like an approaching storm. The taxi shook as he pressed his foot down hard on the accelerator. Tires screeched, horns blared, and the cab darted between cars with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. She clutched the seat, her knuckles white, her heart hammering against her ribs. They're gaining on us, she cried. He didn't flinch. His eyes were sharp, his jaw clenched. The man she thought was just a taxi driver was no longer behind the wheel. This was someone else, a ghost from another life, awakened by danger. The SUVs pushed forward, trying to block them from both sides. With a sudden swerve, he cut through a side alley. So narrow, the mirrors nearly scraped the walls. The black cars followed, their headlights glaring like predators' eyes. Why don't you fight back? She shouted over the roar. I'm trying not to kill anyone, he replied, his voice steel. Not to kill? They're trying to kill you! For a fleeting moment, their eyes met in the rearview mirror. There was something unspoken there. Something that said he had sworn never to take another life unless there was no choice. A vow of redemption. The alley opened into a crowded marketplace. Stalls lined both sides. People rushing to move as the taxi burst through. Vendors shouted, crates toppled, and the SUVs plowed in after them, scattering the crowd in chaos. Her heart raced as she looked back. They're not stopping! He gritted his teeth, twisting the wheel in a desperate maneuver. The taxi slammed through a stack of wooden boxers, shards flying across the windshield. At the very last second, he spun the wheel, sending the cab into a hidden passage between 2 warehouses. The SUVs missed the turn, screeching as they sped past. Silence. Just the sound of his heavy breathing and her trembling gasp. For a moment, they were safe. Or so it seemed. She turned to him, her voice shaking. You could have left me. Why are you protecting me? His hands still gripped the wheel tightly. He didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice low and raw, he said, because saving you is the only chance I have left. To save myself. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. A number with no name flashed on the screen. He hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was cold, sharp, and unforgiving. You can't run forever! We know who you are! And now, we know who she is too! Her blood froze. They weren't just after him anymore. They were after her. The taxi driver closed his eyes for a split second, a storm of regret and determination flashing across his face. Then he whispered into the phone, touch her. You'll remember why you feared me in the first place! He hung up. The car was silent. But in that silence, she realized she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was part of his war. The closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous it became for both of them. The taxi rolled to a stop in an abandoned warehouse far from the crowded city streets. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, but the silence between them was deafening. She sat there, her heart still pounding, her mind struggling to catch up with everything she had just witnessed. Finally, she broke the silence. Who are you really? Her voice trembled, though her eyes burned with determination. You're not a taxi driver? Not even close. He stared out the windshield for a long moment, his hands gripping the wheel as though letting go might release the ghost he had been holding back. His jaw clenched, his chest rose with a heavy breath, and then he spoke. I was trained to disappear, he said quietly. Trained, she repeated. Confused, he nodded. I worked for an organization that doesn't exist on paper. Governments used us when things had to be done silently. I was their weapon, their shadow. Her eyes widened. She had imagined many things: criminal, fugitive, maybe even undercover convict. This was something far darker. So why a taxi driver? She asked softly. His lips curled in a faint, bitter smile. Because it's the closest thing to freedom I could find. A cab lets me blend in. I become invisible. No one asks questions when you drive them home. She shook her head, her emotions torn between fear and fascination. And me? Why did you let me in your cab? For the first time, he looked at her directly. His eyes weren't cold now. They carried pain, regret, and something she couldn't name. You remind me of someone I lost. Someone I swore I'd protect, but couldn't. The words hit her like a blow. She saw the raw honesty in his gaze. The weight of a man who had lived too many lives, fought too many battles, and carried too many scars. Before she could respond, the sudden crunch of footsteps echoed outside the warehouse. He instantly moved, his instincts kicking in. He pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. The metal door creaked, and 3 figures entered armed. Shadows of the world he thought he had left behind. Come back with us, one of them said, his voice harsh. You know you can't run forever. The taxi driver's stance shifted. He wasn't a cabbie anymore. His entire body moved like a predator, silent, calculating. But then, the man added something that froze him. If you don't return, the girl dies with you. Her breath caught in her throat. She realized she wasn't just a bystander in his story anymore. She was the key. The reason they wanted him back. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was safer with him or in the hands of his enemies. When the past came crashing into the present, escape was no longer an option. The warehouse air grew heavier as the 3 men closed in, their weapons glinting under the dim overhead lights. The girl's pulse quickened. Her entire body felt frozen, yet her eyes never left the taxi driver. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. Stay behind me, he whispered without looking back. She obeyed, though every instinct told her to run. But something deep inside refused to abandon him, not after everything she had learned. The first attacker lunged forward. In a flash, the taxi driver grabbed a wrench lying on the floor. Spinning it with the precision of someone who had trained his entire life, the metal cracked against the man's wrist, sending his gun skidding across the floor. The second man raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the driver shoved a heavy crate toward him. The impact knocked him off balance, and in seconds, the driver was on him swift, ruthless, efficient. The girl gasped, both horrified and amazed. This wasn't a cab driver anymore. This was someone dangerous, someone lethal. But then, the third Manticore, stronger, more composed than the rest, pointed his gun directly at her. Enough, he barked. Come with us, or she dies. The driver froze, his chest heaving. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the raw desperation in his eyes. He could fight 10 men, maybe more. But the sight of that gun aimed at her made him powerless. The girl swallowed hard, her mind racing. If she did nothing, he would surrender. If he surrendered, he might not survive that. Neither would she. Suddenly, her eyes darted to the gun, lying on the floor, the one the first man had dropped. Without thinking, she lunged for it. Her fingers closed around the cold steel, and she pointed it at the man threatening her. Put it down! She shouted, her hands trembling but her voice steady. The driver's eyes widened. For the first time, she wasn't just someone he had to protect. She was standing beside him, willing to fight for him. The standoff stretched, silence heavy as stone. And then, chaos. The driver moved like lightning, striking the gunman's arm while she fired a shot into the ceiling. The deafening blast disoriented everyone in the room, giving him just enough time to knock the man unconscious. The warehouse fell silent again, except for their heavy breathing. She lowered the gun, her hands still shaking. I can't believe I just did that. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, then finally spoke. You just saved my life. But before relief could settle in, his gaze darkened. This was only the beginning. They won't stop now. And because of me, they'll never stop coming for you either. When the past came crashing into the present, escape was no longer an option. The warehouse air grew heavier as the three men closed in, their weapons glinting under the dim overhead lights. The girl's pulse quickened. Her entire body felt frozen, yet her eyes never left the taxi driver. He didn't look afraid. He looked ready. Stay behind me, he whispered without looking back. She obeyed, though every instinct told her to run. But something deep inside refused to abandon him, not after everything she had learned. The first attacker lunged forward. In a flash, the taxi driver grabbed a wrench lying on the floor. Spinning it with the precision of someone who had trained his entire life, the metal cracked against the man's wrist, sending his gun skidding across the floor. The second man raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the driver shoved a heavy crate toward him. The impact knocked him off balance, and in seconds, the driver was on Himswift, ruthless, efficient. The girl gasped, both horrified and amazed. This wasn't a cab driver anymore. This was someone dangerous, someone lethal. But then, the third Manticore, stronger, more composed than the rest, pointed his gun directly at her. Enough, he barked. Come with us, or she dies. The driver froze, his chest heaving. For a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw the raw desperation in his eyes. He could fight 10 men, maybe more. But the sight of that gun aimed at her made him powerless. The girl swallowed hard, her mind racing. If she did nothing, he would surrender. If he surrendered, he might not survive, and neither would she. Suddenly, her eyes darted to the gun, lying on the floor, the one the first man had dropped. Without thinking, she lunged for it. Her fingers closed around the cold steel, and she pointed it at the man threatening her. Put it down! She shouted, her hands trembling but her voice steady. The driver's eyes widened. For the first time, she wasn't just someone he had to protect. She was standing beside him, willing to fight for him. The standoff stretched, silence heavy as stone. And then, chaos. The driver moved like lightning, striking the gunman's arm while she fired a shot into the ceiling. The deafening blast disoriented everyone in the room, giving him just enough time to knock the man unconscious. The warehouse fell silent again, except for their heavy breathing. She lowered the gun, her hands still shaking. I can't believe I just did that. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, then finally spoke. You just saved my life. But before relief could settle in, his gaze darkened. This was only the beginning. They won't stop now. And because of me, they'll never stop coming for you either. Some truths change lives forever, but what matters most is not the secret itself. It's what we choose to do once the truth is revealed. The days after the revelation were unlike anything anyone could have imagined. The girl, who once thought she had only entered the life of a simple taxi driver, now stood at the center of a story that felt larger than destiny. His identity hidden behind years of silence was finally out in the open. He was not just a man driving a taxi for survival. He was someone with a past soaked in pain, sacrifice, and choices that no ordinary soul could have endured. She remembered the very first ride they shared, when the world had felt ordinary, when she looked at him as just another stranger. Now, she could see how every word he had spoken, every glance he had given, carried the weight of secrets unspoken. It was no coincidence! Their lives had crossed. It was fate pulling two broken souls together, the rich, the powerful. And those who once dismissed him now looked at him with respect with fear. But he didn't crave their approval. He had learned long ago that wealth and titles meant nothing if your heart was empty. What he truly desired was peace. And in the girl's presence, for the first time in years, he felt the possibility of healing. One evening, as the city lights painted the skyline, they met again at the very spot where their journey began. The yellow taxi stood parked quietly, its paint scratched, its seats worn. yet it held a sacred place in their hearts. She smiled faintly, touching the side of the car, remembering the countless conversations they had shared within it. "You could have told me the truth from the start," she whispered, her eyes carrying the weight of all the emotion she couldn't put into words. He lowered his gaze, then looked back at her with honesty that needed no defense. "If I had, would you have stayed?" She didn't answer right away. The silence between them was powerful, filled with memories of everything they had endured together. Finally, she breathed out, "Yes, because even before I knew who you really were, I trusted you. Not the name, not the past. Just you!" For a moment, the world stood still. The noise of the city faded into nothingness. They were just two souls, stripped of lies, looking at each other as they truly were. From that night, life didn't magically become easier. There was still scars that couldn't be erased, still shadows from his past that lingered. But he was no longer alone, and she was no longer lost. Together, they found strength where once there was only weakness, love where once there was only mistrust, and hope where once there was despair. In the end, it was never about him being a taxi driver or a man of hidden power. It was about the fact that sometimes the most extraordinary people hide behind the simplest masks. And sometimes the deepest love grows in the most unexpected places. As the taxi's engine started once again, carrying them into the unknown roads of tomorrow. Both knew one thing with certainty. Their journey had only just begun.